Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World by General Stanley McChrystal. Picture this, September 30th, 2004. The morning sun starts baking Baghdad's sand-colored streets. A handful of men, deliberately dressed to look like anyone else, slip into an ordinary-looking house. But step inside, and it's anything but ordinary. Maps plastered across walls. Weapons carefully stacked in corners. This isn't a U.S. military outpost. This is Al-Qaeda in Iraq's nerve center. They're preparing for something big. The plan? Chillingly simple. 3 everyday sedans packed with propane tanks and ball bearings. And their targets? Not soldiers, families. Meanwhile, just a short drive away, something hopeful is happening. A crowd has gathered for the grand opening of a new sewage plant. Sure, it doesn't sound glamorous, but in a city ripped apart by war, it's a genuine symbol of progress. Politicians are making speeches, but mostly there are kids. Lots of kids. Laughing, playing tag, weaving through the crowd with that boundless energy only children have. Then the first car appears, a Hyundai. It doesn't slow down. It plows full throttle into the group of children. The driver whispers a prayer, then presses a button. In that fraction of a second between his finger moving and the signal reaching the trunk, the entire street transforms into a horrific mosaic of fire, shrapnel, and blood. Mothers start screaming, frantically searching for their sons and daughters. American soldiers stationed nearby sprint toward the chaos. They're trying to set up a perimeter, help the wounded, make some sense of the senseless. And that's exactly when the second car arrives, a Volkswagen. It rockets straight into the cluster of soldiers and terrified children who just stumbled out of the smoke, then detonates. 35 children are now dead. This was the enemy the United States faced in Iraq. And here's the thing that should have made this a cakewalk. On paper, this wasn't even a fair fight. The American-led task force was the most advanced, best equipped, and most lethal fighting force humanity had ever created. They were, as they proudly called themselves, the best of the best. Al-Qaeda in Iraq? A scattered bunch of under-resourced extremists. Yet in 2004, the best of the best were losing. Badly. They weren't losing because they lacked strength, intelligence, or discipline. They were losing because the entire playbook they'd mastered had become obsolete. The world had shifted beneath their feet, and they hadn't even noticed yet. This is the story of their awakening. It's about how a legendary military commander, General Stanley McChrystal, had to demolish a century of conventional wisdom and rebuild his entire organization from the ground up while fighting a brutal war. The book we're diving into today, Team of Teams, is his first-hand account of that transformation. It's become a modern classic, a leadership guide not just for military commanders, but for executives in boardrooms, administrators in hospitals, and founders in startups worldwide. Because here's the truth. The problem General McChrystal faced in Baghdad streets is the exact same problem all of us are wrestling with today. In a world that's become faster, more interconnected, and wildly more unpredictable than ever before. So what's the secret to thriving in chaos? What are the new rules for winning in a complex world? By the time we're done, you'll understand the hidden architecture behind today's most successful teams. You'll see why traditional leadership models are crumbling and what needs to replace them. This isn't just a war story. It's a blueprint for how we work, lead, and win in the future. To really grasp the revolution General McChrystal sparked, we need to understand the machine he inherited. The U.S. military, especially its elite special operations units, was the crown jewel of a century of management science. It was an organization laser-focused on one goal above everything else: efficiency. Think about it this way. As long as armies have existed, commanders have tried to turn battlefield chaos into something predictable. From Roman legions building identical camps no matter where in the world they fought, to Frederick the Great's relentless drills, the goal has always been creating interchangeable parts in a grand military machine. This idea reached its absolute zenith in the 20th century, thanks to a man who never wore a uniform, Frederick Winslow Taylor. In the early 1900s, Taylor was obsessed. Legend has it he'd walk around town trying to find the single most efficient way to take a step. He was optimization incarnate. When he stepped onto a steel company's factory floor, he saw nothing but waste. Workers had their own quirky, handed-down methods. Knowledge spread like folklore. Taylor believed there had to be one perfect way to do everything. Armed with just a stopwatch and a ledger, he studied every single motion. He broke down each task into its tiniest possible components, timed them, refined them, and reassembled them into perfectly optimized processes. He created instruction cards telling workers exactly what to do, down to the second. The results were miraculous. At Bethlehem Steel, his system let machinists cut 50 feet of steel per minute when 9 was the norm. He wasn't using new machines. He was using a revolutionary system for managing people. He called it, quote, scientific management. This philosophy spread like wildfire. It created the assembly line, where Henry Ford could build a car in 93 minutes instead of 12 hours. It powered America's, quote, arsenal of democracy in World War II, churning out ships and planes on a scale that stunned the world. And it created a new type of leader, the master planner, the chess grandmaster. The leader's job was being the all-knowing brain at the pyramid's peak. They did the thinking. The workers, the ground-level soldiers, did the executing. Information flowed upward. Commands flowed down. Each person only needed to know their tiny piece of the puzzle. This separation of thinking and doing was efficiency's very soul. This was the model that built the modern world. And it built the Joint Special Operations Task Force that General McChrystal commanded. He called it an awesome machine. It was essentially a counter-terrorism assembly line. Every operation meticulously planned. Every team exquisitely specialized. Every action executed with brutal precision. When the task force was created after the failed Iran hostage rescue in 1980, a disaster caused by different military branches failing to coordinate, the solution was pure Taylorism. They created a new management layer, a new team of master planners at the top, ensuring everything clicked together perfectly. Against a 20th century enemy, it worked beautifully. But in Iraq, they weren't fighting a 20th century enemy. They were fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. When McChrystal's team started mapping AQI's structure on whiteboards, they didn't see a pyramid. They didn't see an org chart with neat boxes and clear authority lines. What they saw looked like chaos, a web, a network. I had no central headquarters, no uniforms. Its leaders were ghosts who could vanish into crowded cities within minutes. It was decentralized, fluid, and shockingly resilient. When the task force eliminated a high-ranking leader, what should have been a devastating blow, the network just adapted. As one analyst famously quipped, "We killed about 20 of Al-Qaeda's, number 3s, over the past decade, but everyone in a network is number 3. This enemy was what ancient Greeks would have called a polymorph, a shapeshifter, like the mythical sea god Proteus. who could change form at will to escape capture, a QI was constantly morphing. In one city, they acted like a traditional tribal council. In another, they were a sophisticated urban terror cell. They were, in one word, adaptable, and the task force, for all its awesome power, was not. The task force was like France's magnificent Maginot Line after World War I, a marvel of engineering, an impenetrable fortress designed to perfectly fight the last war. But when Germans came in 1940, they didn't attack the line. They simply went around it with fast-moving tanks and airplanes. The world had changed, and the fortress had become a monument to obsolescence. McChrystal's awesome machine was a managerial Maginot Line, perfectly designed for a world that no longer existed. He realized his organization's greatest strength, its ruthless efficiency, had become its greatest weakness. So why had the world changed so dramatically, and what did it mean for leadership and organization? The answer lies in understanding the difference between two words we often use interchangeably: complicated and complex. A jet engine is complicated. It has thousands of parts, but they all fit together logically and predictably. An expert can disassemble and reassemble it. If something breaks, you can diagnose and fix it. The relationships are linear. A rainforest, however, is complex. It's a web of millions of interacting elements: insects, animals, weather patterns, soil bacteria. You cannot predict exactly what happens if you introduce a new species or clear a section of trees. A tiny change, like a butterfly's wings flapping, could trigger a chain reaction leading to a hurricane halfway across the world. The relationships are nonlinear and unpredictable. For a century, our organizations were built to solve complicated problems. Frederick Taylor's factory was a complicated system, but thanks to technology, globalization, and the speed of information, our world has become a complex system. Think about it. 100 years ago, a local protest was a local event. Today, one person with a smartphone can broadcast a protest to millions globally in seconds, potentially sparking movements that topple governments, as we saw with the Arab Spring. The number and speed of connections have exploded. We've gone from neat, linear assembly lines to a world resembling that chaotic, interconnected rainforest. In this new world, you can't predict everything. You can't plan for every contingency. A rigid, top-down command and control system is simply too slow and too inflexible to keep up. This was McChrystal and his team's profound insight. They were failing not because they were doing things wrong, but because they were trying to solve a complex problem with a complicated solution. They realized efficiency was no longer enough. The new holy grail had to be adaptability. And if they wanted to become adaptable, they couldn't look to old org charts. They had to look at the one part of their organization that already embodied this quality: their small, elite teams. What makes a Navy SEAL team so incredibly effective? It isn't just that they're all super soldiers. The real magic isn't in the individuals. It's in the connections between them. Consider the 2009 rescue of Captain Richard Phillips from Somali pirates. 3 SEAL snipers, on the rocking deck of a Navy destroyer, at night, 75 feet away, had to simultaneously eliminate 3 pirates, holding the captain hostage on a small, bobbing lifeboat. They had only a split-second window, no time to ask for permission. They had to think and act as one organism. And they did. 3 shots, 3 kills, 1 rescued captain. That level of coordinated adaptive action doesn't come from a rulebook, it's forged. It's forged in Bud/S's brutal crucible, the SEALs, infamous 6-month training program in Coronado, California. People think Bud/S is about weeding out the physically weak, but instructors will tell you that's not true. Most people who quit are physically capable. They quit because they lack the right mindset. They're in it for themselves, not the team. From day one, Bud/S is designed to destroy the idea of individual performance. You're assigned a swim buddy, and you never go anywhere without him. You're put into boat crews, and if one person doesn't pull their weight, the entire boat flips and everyone suffers. The training is designed to be impossible to survive alone. Through this shared hardship, two critical things are built. First is trust. Not just believing someone's a good person, but a deep, intimate, predictive understanding of how they'll act under pressure. You learn their strengths, weaknesses, their tells. This dense connectivity allows a team to move and react without verbal commands. Second is a shared sense of purpose. Every SEAL understands not just their immediate task, but the larger strategic mission goal. They see the whole chessboard. This shared context allows them to improvise, to make the right call when the plan inevitably falls apart. Trust and purpose. These are the two ingredients creating the oneness of an elite team. This is the polar opposite of a traditional command structure. A command is built on vertical relationships, you and your boss. A team is built on horizontal relationships, you and your teammates. We see this difference play out in other high-stakes environments. For decades, airline cockpits were run as commands. The captain was the heroic, all-knowing leader. But as planes became more technologically sophisticated, more complex, this model started failing. In 1978, United Flight 173 crashed near Portland, Oregon, running out of fuel while the crew fixated on a minor landing gear problem. The co-pilot and flight engineer tried warning the captain about fuel levels, but in the cockpit's rigid hierarchy, their warnings were too subtle, and the captain wasn't listening. He was so focused on one problem aspect that he lost sight of the whole system. 10 people died. Contrast that with U.S. Airways Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson. In 2009, Captain Sullenberger's plane lost both engines after a bird strike minutes after takeoff. There was no checklist for this, no procedure. But the crew, trained in a new philosophy called crew resource management, functioned as a team. They communicated, collaborated, and improvised a solution in under 4 minutes, saving everyone aboard. The aviation industry learned the hard way that in complex environments, you need a team, not a command. This was General McChrystal's breakthrough. He had an organization full of the world's best small teams, SEALs, Rangers, Army Special Forces, but the organization as a whole was a command. It was what he calls a command of teams. The teams themselves were fluid and adaptable, but they were trapped in rigid silos. SEALs didn't trust Army guys. Operators on the ground didn't trust intelligence analysts back at headquarters. Information didn't flow between teams. There were blinks in the system, gaps where collaboration broke down. He saw this firsthand when he found a supply closet at Baghdad Airport stuffed with unopened bags of intelligence from raids. Operators would grab laptops and cell phones, throw them in bags, and toss them on helicopters. By the time analysts got to it, the information was stale and useless. Operators saw analysts as slow and irrelevant. Analysts saw operators as arrogant door kickers. They were on the same side but weren't on the same team. They were all playing the prisoner's dilemma. In this classic game theory experiment, 2 prisoners are interrogated separately. If both stay silent, they each get small sentences. If one rats out the other, the rat goes free, and the other gets a long sentence. If both rat each other out, they both get medium sentences. From a purely self-interested perspective, the best move is always betraying your partner. But if both do that, they end up worse off than if they just trusted each other and cooperated. This was the task force. Each team, acting in its own self-interest, hoarding information, competing for resources, was making the entire organization weaker. McChrystal realized he couldn't just make one giant team of thousands of people. The magic of a small team comes from its size, from that intimate, personal trust. But what if he could get teams to trust each other the way individuals on a team do? What if he could scale the oneness? This was the birth of the team of teams concept. The goal wasn't for every individual to know every other individual. The goal was for every team to feel a bond of trust and shared purpose with every other team. The connections had to become horizontal, crisscrossing the entire organization, just like their enemy's network structure. But how do you actually do that? How do you build trust and purpose across thousands of people, scattered across continents, made up of different cultures? This led to the two core pillars of McChrystal's revolution. The first pillar was shared consciousness. He had to create a collective brain, a single, holistic understanding of the entire war shared by everyone, from generals in Washington to the youngest private on the ground in Iraq. He started by redesigning their physical space. At their new headquarters at Balad Air Base, they gutted a massive aircraft bunker and built a single, open-plan Joint Operations Center, or JOC. No cubicles, no private offices. Intelligence analysts sat next to operators. CIA agents sat next to Army Rangers. A giant wall of screens at the front showed live video feeds from operations, real-time intelligence updates, and maps of the entire theater. Anyone could look up and see the whole system, anytime. They called it the Star Wars Bar because it was filled with a motley crew from every corner of the security universe. This was the exact opposite of the traditional need-to-know military culture, but the physical space was just the beginning. The true heart of shared consciousness was a daily meeting called the O&I, for Operations and Intelligence. Every single day, for 2 hours, McChrystal would host a secure video teleconference. But this wasn't just for senior commanders. Using new technology, they broadcast this meeting to everyone. Eventually, 7,000 people daily were dialing in. It was part battlefield update, part Socratic dialogue. A young analyst in a remote outpost could brief the commanding general directly, and then a SEAL team leader in another country could jump in with a question. They talked through problems in real time, for everyone to see. McChrystal, the 4-star general, made himself vulnerable. He would think out loud, admitting when he didn't know something and asking for advice. This modeled the culture he wanted: humility, transparency, and collaboration. The O&I became the daily ritual weaving the network together, pumping information and context through the entire organization's veins. The second pillar was building human relationships to make that information flow meaningful. To beat the prisoner's dilemma, they needed more than just a shared screen. They needed real trust. So they started a radical embedding program. They'd take a world-class Navy SEAL and send him to live and work with an Army Special Forces team for 6 months. Or they'd take a battle-hardened operator, put him in a suit, and send him to an embassy as a liaison officer. The initial resistance was intense. These were tribal cultures that had been rivals for decades. But slowly, it worked. The SEAL would see the Army's disciplined strengths. The Army team would see value in the SEALs, creative thinking. They built personal relationships, face-to-face bonds. And that trust extended from the individual to the entire unit. Suddenly, the other guys weren't so bad anymore. This combination, the extreme transparency of the O&I and the deep personal trust built through embedding, created shared consciousness. It was the organizational equivalent of every player on a sports team knowing the whole playbook and trusting their teammates to be in the right position. But shared consciousness alone isn't enough. Imagine a soccer team where every player sees the perfect pass but has to get the coach's permission before kicking the ball. They'd be paralyzed. This led to the second, and perhaps even more radical, pillar of the transformation: empowered execution. This meant decentralizing decision-making authority. It meant pushing power out to the organization's edges. For centuries, leadership has followed what McChrystal calls the Perry Principle. In the 1850s, Commodore Matthew Perry sailed to Japan with authority to act as ambassador, trade commissioner, and commander-in-chief. Why? Because it would take months for a message to reach Washington. The president couldn't see what was happening, so he had to trust Perry to make the call. But as technology improved, the telegraph, the radio, and now the internet, leaders could see more, and the more they could see, the more they wanted to control. The temptation to micromanage became overwhelming. McChrystal had more visibility into his operations than any commander in history. He could watch raids in real time on headquarters screens. He could, if he wanted, be the ultimate chess master directing every move. But he realized this was a trap. The modern battlefield's speed was too fast for one person's brain. By the time a decision traveled up the chain of command to him and his approval traveled back down, the opportunity was gone. He needed to reverse the Perry Principle. He needed to create a culture of eyes on, hands off. His job wasn't making every decision. His job was providing his teams with shared consciousness, the context, and trust, so they could make the best decisions. He began delegating decisions once reserved for generals, pushing them down to colonels, majors, and captains on the ground. He told them, as long as it's not immoral or illegal, if it supports our effort, do it. This transformed the leader's role. The leader was no longer the heroic chess master. The leader had to become a gardener. A chess master controls every move. A gardener doesn't grow plants. A gardener creates the environment, the soil, water, sunlight, in which plants can grow themselves. McChrystal's job was tending the ecosystem. He had to nurture the culture of trust and transparency. He had to prune the bureaucracy choking communication. He had to ensure the network was healthy, so the teams within it could flourish and adapt on their own. This combination of shared consciousness and empowered execution was the magic formula. It created a team of teams. And the results were staggering. Before the transformation, the task force conducted about 18 raids monthly. By 2006, they were conducting 300 raids monthly, a 17-fold increase in operational tempo with almost no resource increase. And they were getting smarter. They were learning and adapting faster than the enemy. This new, networked organism was finally put to the ultimate test in the hunt for Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a QI's brutal leader. The final chase was a masterpiece of teams in action. It began with an intelligence sergeant major, acting on his own intuition, noticing suspicious activity at a farmhouse. This led to a raid, which led to capturing a key figure, who eventually gave up the name of Zarqawi's spiritual advisor. Then the entire global network focused on finding this one man. For 17 days, they maintained round-the-clock surveillance, a feat requiring pooling ISR assets, like Predator drones, that had once been sources of intense competition. But now, with shared purpose, The teams collaborated seamlessly. They followed the advisor through a series of vehicle swaps designed to shake surveillance until he finally led them to a house in a small village. A man in black robes came out to greet him. It was Zarqawi. The raid force supposed to capture him was delayed. The clock was ticking. The local commander on the ground didn't wait for McChrystal's permission. He didn't need to. He had the context. He had the authority. He made the call to use the backup plan, an airstrike from 2 F-16s. On June 7, 2006, the house disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Zarqawi was dead. But the work wasn't over. In the hours that followed, the task force launched coordinated follow-on raids across Iraq, hitting targets they'd identified during the chase, crippling the AQI network before it could react. The organization that had been outmaneuvered and humiliated in 2004 had transformed itself. To defeat a network, they'd become a network. They'd become a team of teams. And they were finally winning. General McChrystal's task force story is more than just military history. It's a parable for our times. It reveals a fundamental shift in how the world works, and a corresponding need for a new way of leading. The central idea, the one I hope stays with you, is this. The pursuit of pure efficiency, which drove the 20th century, is now a dangerously outdated strategy. In a complex world, adaptability is the new currency. Organizations that thrive will be those that can learn and respond fastest. Think about that computer simulation of a future traffic intersection without stop signs or traffic lights. It looks like absolute chaos. Cars zipping through from all directions, missing each other by inches. Our 20th century brain, our mental model, screams that this is wrong, unsafe, inefficient. But it's actually the opposite, because every car is communicating with every other car in real time. Because they have shared consciousness, they can move through the intersection faster with far fewer accidents. It's an organic, adaptive system. It's a team of teams. This is the thinking we need to embrace. We're often trapped by past mental models, the neat, tidy org charts, and the belief in the heroic, all-knowing leader. But as GM discovered with its tragic ignition switch failure, those rigid silos can become death traps. Information gets stuck. People don't talk to each other. No one sees the whole picture. Disaster follows. Ford, under Alan Mulally, took the opposite approach. He broke down silos, forced collaboration, and created his One Ford culture. He became a gardener, and while GM was going bankrupt, Ford was turning a profit. So how can you start applying these ideas right now in your own life? You don't need to be a general or a CEO. This starts with small, deliberate actions. First, practice seeing the whole system. Whatever team or group you're part of, a sports team, a school project, a part-time job, don't just focus on your individual task. Ask questions. Understand how your piece fits into the larger mission. Why does this matter? What's the ultimate goal we're all trying to achieve? Developing this contextual awareness is the first step toward shared consciousness. Second, practice radical transparency. The old instinct is hoarding information, believing knowledge is power. The new rule is that shared knowledge is power. Next time you send an email or text about a group project, ask yourself, who else needs to know this? Who else could benefit from this context? Add one more person to the conversation. Default to sharing. And third, build a bridge. The real magic of a team of teams happens when trust is built between different groups. So find someone from another team, a different club at school, a different department at work, even just a different friend group, and intentionally build a relationship. Take them out for coffee. Ask what they're working on, what their challenges are. Be the liaison officer. You'll be amazed at the new perspectives and opportunities that open up when you break out of your own silo. These actions might feel small, even inefficient, but they're the seeds from which a truly adaptive, resilient, and powerful team of teams can grow. That was a summary of Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. We've certainly covered the main ideas today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary like this is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the major cities and rivers, but it can't give you the feeling of sun on your skin, or the smell of local food, or the sound of the language. The real magic happens when you visit the country yourself. If any of the stories or ideas we talked about today resonated with you, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. Reading it isn't just about learning a new management theory. It's an experience that can fundamentally change how you see leadership, teamwork, and the world around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to continue exploring the ideas that have shaped the world's most successful people, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps us reach more curious minds like yours. Let's keep learning and growing together.